Okay, let's talk about Eddard VI. Eddard VI is another somewhat brief chapter that was written during George R. R. Martin's boom period for A Game of Thrones and put back in earlier. Uh, I've talked endlessly about how George had a little hiccup during 1994 and was having trouble writing, and then it kind of boomed with the story in 1995. Eddard VI is another chapter that was written in the boom period and introduced back. I would suspect fairly early in the boom period. I would suspect around the time of Aria 3, but who knows. But the I only have so much information on when these when these chapters were written. Um, it's a somewhat unnecessary chapter, Eddard 6. It's mainly there for continuity, building knowledge about Stannis, and kind of mentioning things that have been mentioned in the past and continuing the continuity of it. The most significant thing is the introduction of Gendry as a piece of evidence that there's the affair, the incest going on between Cersei and Jaime. But let's get into it. Again, originally when George was writing, he kind of went right to the tourney in the Eddard story, and then later he kind of slow rolled the time leading up to the tourney and wanted to have more of Ned Stark's super sleuth. So let's get into it. Eddard. It's the Hand's tourney that's the cause of all the trouble, my lords, the commander of the City Watch complained to the City Council. The commander of the City Watch complained to the King's Council. Again, it's just, the build up to the Hand's tourney is just so many chapters dedicated to this, But here it is. But this time we're going to get an introduction to Janos Slynt, who plays a fairly important role later. So George felt that he needed an introduction. The King's tourney, Ned corrected, wincing. I assure you, the Hand wants no part of it. Call it what you will, my lord. Knights have been arriving from all over the realm, and every night we get 2 free riders, 3 craftsmen, 6 men-at-arms, a dozen merchants, 24 whores, and more thieves than I dare guess. This cursed heat and half the city in a fervor to start, and now with all these visitors. Last night we had a drowning, a tavern riot, 3 knife fights, a rape, 2 fires, robberies beyond count, and a drunken horse race down the street of the Sisters. The night before, a woman's head was found at the Great Sept, floating in the rainbow pool. No one seems to know how it got there, or who it belongs to. How dreadful, Varys said with a shudder. And so we're hearing about, general unrest. This unrest is fairly irrelevant to the plot. It's just kind of here to have a reason for Janos Slynt to be here, to be introduced. And there's an important plot point with Littlefinger and his connection to Janos Slynt. Lord Renly Baratheon was less sympathetic. If you cannot keep the king's peace, Janos, perhaps the city watch should be commanded by someone who can. This is one of those things that fans kind of point out, one of Ned's big mistakes. Like, he could have easily gotten rid of Janos Slynt and put in one of his own men, put in Jory as the head of the city watch. Like, he could have easily done that. He's Hand, but he doesn't. In fact, Tyrion changes the city watch people when he comes in. So he's a little smarter than Ned here. Stout, jowly Janos Slynt puffed himself up like an angry frog, his bald pate reddening. Aegon the Dragon himself could not keep the peace, Lord Renly. I need more men. How many? Ned asked, leaning forward. As ever, Robert had not troubled himself to attend the council session, so it fell to his hand to speak for him. As many as can be gotten, Lord Hand. Hire 50 new men, Ned told him. Lord Baelish will see that you get the coin. I will. You will. And this is the important aspect, is that Lord Baelish is the one that has the purse strings here, and so he's really the one that controls the city watch. You found 40,000 gold dragons for a champion's purse. Surely you can scrape together a few coppers to keep the king's peace. Ned turned back to Janos Slynt. I will give you 20 good swords from my own household guard to serve with the watch until the crowds have left. Um, I wonder if we ever. I wonder if we ever hear about those 20 good swords, or what. I'm sure they're arrested or killed or something. 40,000 gold dragons is still just. It's such a big goof. I think George R. Martin in interviews has spoken about how ridiculous it is, and I mean, keep in mind how much 40,000 gold dragons is. I think in Dunk and Egg, they say that someone can survive for a year. A peasant can survive for a year on 3 gold dragons or something. So like, you know, you can assume that like, say it's some sort of like low income today. Like say it's that is equivalent to $20,000 a year or something. Um, so that means 40,000 gold dragons would be the equivalent of like $200 million. You know, I mean, even if you're like, okay, maybe it's less, maybe 10,000. Well, it's still $100 million. Like, it's such a ridiculous amount of money that they're giving to the Hound. $100 million. Like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, even if you're saying, well, maybe it's 5,000, maybe it's the equivalent of $5,000. No, like, oh my God, that's still $50 million. Like you just cannot get beyond how ridiculous a sum 40,000 gold dragons is, even in the sense of like how much it is to carry. Assuming that like a gold dragon is like the size of something small, like a dime. A dime is like, I think a dime is like 2.5 grams. So you're talking like 250 pounds or something, like something that's just like incapable of the Hound to be carrying. Like it's just ridiculous amount of money. Like, and of course, like what if the dragon is more than say the size of a dime? Anyway, all thanks, Lord Hand, Slint said, bowing. I promise you, they shall be put to good use. And so this is mainly a continuity chapter. We needed to introduce Janis Slint. That's all. We needed to introduce the idea that Janis Slint was connected to Littlefinger and is running the City Watch. When the commander had taken his leave, Eddard Stark turned to the rest of the council. The sooner this folly is done with, the better I shall like it. And if the expense and trouble were not irksome enough, all and sundry insisted on salting Ned's wound by calling it the hand's tourney. All and sundry is very, I mean, this means everybody, all and sundry. But it's a very ice and fire kind of thing he throws in it quite a bit. As the hand's tourney, as if he were the cause of it. And Robert honestly seems to think she should feel honored. This is weird that Ned thinks that he's going to be blamed for it when everybody loves the tourney. Like everybody loves it. They should love the hand for it. Ned should feel honored. The realm prospers from such events, my lord, Grand Maester Pycelle said. They bring the great to the chance of glory, and the lowly a respite from their woes. I mean, imagine take anything that's like super costly to the state. Like say take a stadium. You know, people pay to be attached to stadiums, and those are huge expenses. Many people argue that they're not worth it. Economists would say they're not worth it, but people pay to be associated with it. Imagine if the stadium were Ned, like you build a stadium in a city and you called it the Ned Stark Stadium. Like that's an honor. This is the hand's tourney. So Ned's wrong here. Lord Renly laughed. We're fortunate my brother Stannis is not with us. Remember the time he proposed to outlaw brothels? The king asked him if perhaps he'd like to outlaw eating, shitting, and breathing while he was at it. If truth be told, I oftentimes wonder how Stannis ever got that ugly daughter of his. He goes to his marriage bed like a man marching to a battlefield, with a grim look in his eyes and a determination to do his duty. Some exposition right here, introducing us to the Stannis character. It's very clear that George realized that he hadn't put enough in about Stannis, and then he needed to introduce more about him, especially as he's writing the story and he realizes that Stannis is going to play a big role in a Clash of Kings later on. Or, I mean, actually, while he's writing this, he probably is still thinking that this can be the War of the Five Kings could be one book. But nonetheless, Ned had not joined the laughter. I wonder about your brother Stannis as well. I wonder what he intends, when he intends to visit end his visit to Dragonstone and resume his seat on this council. No doubt as soon as we've scourged all those whores into the sea, Littlefinger replied, provoking more laughter. I've had quite enough about whores for one day, Ned said, rising. Until the morrow. And one could say that, like, in this situation, Littlefinger should be opposed to Stannis, considering he runs a brothel. Harwin had the door when Ned returned to the Tower of the Hand. Summon Jory to my chambers and tell your father to saddle my horse, Ned told him, too brusquely. As you say, my lord. The Red Keep and the hands turning were chafing him raw. Yes, we got this. Ned reflected as he climbed. He yearned for the comfort of Catelyn's arms, for the sound of Robb and Jon crossing swords in the practice yard, for the cool days and cool nights of the north. In his chambers, he stripped off his council silks and sat for a moment with the book while he waited for Jory to arrive. This book introduced last chapter that, and I say that this chapter maybe was written around the time of Arya 3, is that Illyrio and Varys like bring up this book, that he has the book and he has the bastard, which is, this chapter. The lineages, and there's actually another thing that makes me think that they're written around the same time as Arya 3, and that has to do with Renly, the Renly-Loras conspiracy, but we'll get to that. The lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children. By Grand Maester Melian. Pycelle had spoken truly. It made for ponderous reading, yet Jon Arryn had asked for it, and Ned felt certain he had reasons. There was something here, some truth buried in these brittle yellow pages, if only he could see it. But what? The tome was over a century old. Scarcely a man now alive had yet been born when Melian had compiled his dusty lists of weddings, births, and deaths. It's interesting, he made him a Grand Maester for 100 years ago. So, around the time of Dunk and Egg, I don't know if has he ever mentioned again Melian? No. Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, he has not been mentioned, but though he should appear kind of in the Dunk and Egg timeline. Though he's never mentioned again. And a Grand Maester, I guess, the idea is a Grand Maester maybe has more visibility of all these visiting lords than if he were at any other station. He wouldn't actually see all these lords. He opened to the section on House Lannister once more and turned the pages slowly, hoping against hope that something would leap out at him. The Lannisters were an old family, tracing their descent back to Lan the Clever. All right, and so a trickster from the Age of Heroes. We already get the retcon. Originally, George had purposely made the Lannisters Andal, and he specifically kind of said that their name sounds Andal. And here he has retconned it already to that they're from the Age of Heroes as well. So they are first men. Who is no doubt as legendary as Bran the Builder, though far more beloved of singers and tale-tellers. In the songs, Lan was the fellow who wingled the Casterlys out of Casterly Rock with no weapon but his wits, and stole gold from the sun to brighten his curly hair. Ned wished he were here now to winkle the truth out of this damnable book. But, this is here to establish that the Lannisters have always had the golden hair for thousands and thousands of years. So he retcons the Andal out of them. A sharp rap at the door heralded Jory Cassell. Ned closed Mallion's tome and bid him enter. I promised the city watch 20 of my guard until the tourney is done, he told him. Oh, only until the tourney is done. I rely on you to make the choice. I guess it doesn't matter. Give Alan the command and make certain the men understand they are needed to stop fights, not start them. Alan. I think I looked up Alan. Alan, yes. Yeah, that's right. Alan is one of the few that joins with Harwin. He joins the Brotherhood Without Banners, but dies at Mummer's Ford. So, make certain the men understand they're needed to stop fights, not start them. Rising, Ned opened a cedar chest and removed a light linen undertunic. Did you find the stable boy? The watchman, my lord, Jory said. He vows he'll never touch another horse. What did he have to say? He claims he knew Lord Arryn well. Fast friends they were, Jory snorted. The hand always gave the lads a copper on their name days, he said. Had a way with horses, never rode his mounts too hard, and brought them carrots and apples, so they were always pleased to see him. Carrots and apples, Ned repeated. It sounded as if this boy would be even less used than the others, and he was the last of the four Littlefinger had turned up. Jory had spoken to each of them in turn. Sir Hugh had been brusque and uninformative, and arrogant, as only a new made knight can be. If the hand wished to talk to him, he should be pleased to receive him, but he would not be questioned by a mere captain of guard, even if said captain was 10 years older and 100 times the swordsman. The servant girl had at least been pleasant. She and Lord John had been reading more than was good for him, and he was troubled and melancholy over his young son's frailty, and gruff with the lady wife. The pot boy, now Cordwainer, had never exchanged so much of a word with Lord John, and was full of oddments of kitchen gossip. The Lord had been quarreling with the king. The Lord only picked at his food. The Lord was sending his boy to be fostered on Dragonstone. The Lord had taken a great interest in the breeding of hunting hounds. The Lord had visited a master armorer to commission a new suit of plate, wrought all in pale silver and blue jasper falcon and mother of pearl moon on the breast. The king's own brother had gone with him to help choose the design, the potboy said. No, not Lord Renly, the other one, Lord Stannis. So, again, this is all of this information, except for the armor part, has been here before. Like, we later meet, we don't really get anything out of Sir Hugh. Like, George had written the Sir Hugh dying part, and now is coming back and putting in Sir Hugh, but Sir Hugh doesn't provide any information. And then it's like, oh, John was worried about his son. Well, we had that before. We had him, we had the fostering situation. The seed is strong, all sorts of stuff. The book, there's nothing new here. It's all just continuity, except for the armor. Did our watchman recall anything else of note? The lad swears John was strong as a man half his age. Often went riding with Lord Stannis, he says. Stannis again, Ned thought. He found that curious. John Arryn, he had been cordial, but never friendly. And while Robert had been riding north of the wall, Stannis had removed himself to Dragonstone, the Targaryen island fastness he had conquered in his brother's name. He had given no word as when he might return. Where did he go on these rides? Ned asked. The boy says that they visited a brothel. A brothel, Ned said. The Lord of the Eyrie and the Hand of the King had visited a brothel with Stannis Baratheon? He shook his head, incredulous, wondering what Lord Renly would make of this tidbit. Robert's lusts were the subject of ribald drinking songs throughout the realm, but Stannis was a different sort of man. A bare year younger than the king, yet utterly unlike him, stern, humorless, unforgiving, grim in his sense of duty. The boy insists it's true. The hand took 3 guardsmen with him, and the boy says they were joking of it, and he took their horses afterward. Which brothel? The boy did not know. The guards would. A pity Lysa carried them off to the Vale, Ned said dryly. The gods are doing their best to vex us. Lady Lysa, Maester Coleman, Lord Stannis, everyone who might actually know the truth of what happened to Jon Arryn is 1,000 leagues away. Will you summon Lord Stannis back to Dragonstone? You should. You should, Ned. Summon him back. Not yet, Ned said. Not until I have a better notion of what this is all about and where he stands. The matter nagged at him. Why did Stannis leave? Had he played some part in Jon Arryn's murder? Or was he afraid? I mean, we heard that it was the Lannisters, right? Like, from the beginning, he's been told that it's the Lannisters. Or was he afraid? Probably afraid. I mean, you were told in the beginning that it was the Lannisters. I mean, he's like, all the people that knew what happened fled. Lady Lysa already told you what happened. I mean, it's strange that he's, I mean, in the end, it's not the Lannisters, it's Lady Lysa. But it's strange that he's so resistant to the idea when he's told outright that it's the Lannisters here. He found it hard to imagine what could frighten Stannis Baratheon, who had once held Storm's End through a year of siege, surviving on rats and boot leather, while Lords Tyrell and Redwyne sat outside their host, banqueting in sight of his walls. A lot of time on Stannis, building the character. Bring me my doublet, if you would. The grey with the direwolf sigil. I want this armorer to know who I am. It might make him more forthcoming. Jory went to the wardrobe. Lord Renly is brother to Lord Stannis as well as the king. Yet it seems that he was not invited on these rides. Ned was not sure what to make of Renly, with all his friendly ways and easy smiles. Now, here. A few days past, he had taken Ned aside to show him an exquisite rose gold locket. Inside was a miniature, painted in the vivid mirror style, of a lovely young girl with doe eyes and a cascade of soft brown hair. Renly seemed anxious to know if the girl reminded him of anyone, and when Ned had no answer but a shrug, he seemed disappointed. The maid was Loras Tyrell's sister Marjorie, he'd confessed. But there were those who said she looked like Lyanna. No, Ned had told him, bemused. Could it be that Lord Renly, who looked so like young Robert, had conceived a passion for a girl he fancied to be a young Lyanna? That struck him as more than passing queer. So, and again, this is a continuity thing that George puts in a Game of Thrones, and then he essentially drops this plot completely. So Cersei had mentioned that Renly was scheming against her, and here we find out what he's doing. He thinks that Robert can set aside Cersei, get a divorce, and get with Marjorie. And then later in Arya 3, this scheme again is brought up by Varys as one of the significant pieces of the realm that needs to be watched. And so Renly thinking that Robert would divorce Cersei and get with Marjorie, which is very reminiscent, of Henry VIII, who Robert is mostly based on. But it implies that Renly knows about the incest. However, later on in A Clash of Kings, Renly seems honestly surprised about the incest and does not, and which is odd, so you'd think that Renly, I don't know, based on this, you'd think that Renly would know about the incest. Like, why is he thinking that Robert would be willing to set Cersei aside and get a divorce, which is not common here. in Westeros. You know, it's one would say it's almost impossible. With you'd need like the high septon and all sorts of things like to try to get this done. I mean, when Henry did it, he was excommunicated, right? Like when Henry VIII did it, he was excommunicated. This is a big deal. Divorce and setting aside somebody is a big deal. And so because it's such a big deal, you'd think that Renly would knew about the incest, but then later he's surprised by it. So I don't know what to make of it. It just seems like a dropped plot from in a Game of Thrones, the Renly Loras scheme that goes nowhere. Jory held out the doublet, and Ned slid his hands through the armholes. Perhaps Lord Stannis will return for Robert's tourney, he said as Jory laced the garment up the back. That would be a stroke of fortune, my lord, Jory said. Ned buckled on a longsword. In other words, not bloody likely. His smile was grim. Jory draped Ned's cloak across his shoulder and clasped it at the throat with the hand's badge of office. The armorer lives above his shop in a large house at the top of the street of steel. Alan knows the way, my lord. Ned nodded. The gods help this potboy if he sent me off herring after shadows. It was a slim enough staff to lean on, but the John Arryn that Ned Stark had known was not one to wear jeweled and silvered plate. Steel was steel. It was meant for protection, but not ornament. He might have changed his views, to be sure. He would scarcely have been the first man who came to look on things differently after a few years at court. But the change was marked enough to make Ned wonder. Is there any other service I might perform? I suppose you best begin visiting whorehouses. Hard duty, my lord, Jory grinned. The men will be glad to help. Porther has made a fair start already. Let's check about Porther. What happens to Porther? I like checking on all of these. Porther, he just disappears, and so Bran Stark thinks of him as dead later on. So we never see him killed, but I guess he's killed off screen. Poor Porther. Ned's favorite horse was saddled and waiting in the yard. Varys and Jax fell in beside him. Oh, Varley and Jax. Jax is the one that survives. Jax is the one that, as I say, disappears, but then reappears with Catelyn. So it's assumed that he was captured and then given as a hostage in negotiations. Varley is killed in the throne room during the coup. And so I know I just love checking up on these guys. Their steel caps and shirts of mail must have been sweltering, yet they said no word of complaint. As Eddard passed beneath the king's gate into the stink of the city, his gray and white cloak streaming from his shoulders, he saw eyes everywhere and kicked his mount into a trot. His guards followed. A lot of atmosphere in this story, in this chapter. He looked behind him frequently as they made their way through the crowded city streets. Tomard and Desmond both get killed in the coup. Had left the castle early this morning to take up positions on the route they must take and watch for anyone following them. But even so, Ned was uncertain. The shadow of the king's spider and his little birds had him fretting like a maiden on her wedding night. What does he know about fretting maidens on her? Well, it's fine. The street of steel began at the market square beside the river gate, as was named on the maps. The mud gate, as it's commonly called. Later in A Game of Thrones, Arya starts walking around the city, and you try to figure out the geography. And I would say that the geography doesn't make sense in A Game of Thrones. I think she famously leaves the city walls and then comes to the the port or something. Or leaves, she leaves the city wall, or the port is outside the city walls, and she like goes to the port, something strange like that. Well, when we get to Arya and her weird wandering, but George has not yet really made a map of the city yet. He definitely does that for the Battle of the Blackwater, and the map is included in that in the Clash of Kings. But there's at this point in the story, there's no use in really trying to figure it out. A mummer on stilts was striding through the throngs like some great insect, with a horde of barefoot children trailing behind him, hooting. Elsewhere, 2 ragged boys, no older than Bran, were dueling with sticks, to the loud encouragement of some and the furious curses of others. An old woman ended the contest by leaning out the window and emptying a bucket of slop on the heads of the combatants. In the shadow of the wall, farmers stood beside their wagons, bellowing out, "Apples, the best apples, cheap at twice the price, and blood melons, sweet as honey, turnips, onions, roots, here you go, here you go, turnips, onions, roots, here you go, here." Cheap at twice the price, the idea, everybody's in the city, so he's jacked up the prices. But, atmosphere. The mud gate was open, and a squad of city watchmen stood under the portcullis in their golden cloaks, leaning on spears. When a column of riders appeared from the west, the guardsmen sprang into action, shouting commands and moving the carts and foot traffic aside to let knights enter with his escort. The first rider through the gate carried a long black banner. The silks rippled in the wind like a living thing. Across the fabric was blazoned a night sky slashed with purple lightning. "Make way for Lord Beric," the rider shouted. "Make way for Lord Beric." So here we Beric is mentioned in the Hand's Tourney, and of course he's sent out with the Brotherhood Without Banners, or he's sent out with the men that become the Brotherhood Without Banners, and so to deal with the Mountain. And so this is again another kind of continuity thing. Well, we're going to mention Beric again, so people really know this character. And close behind came the young lord himself, a dashing figure on a black courser, with red gold hair and a black satin cloak dusted with stars. "Here to fight in the Hand's Tourney, my lord," a guardsman called out. "Here to win the Hand's Tourney," Lord Beric shouted back as the crowd cheered. Ned turned off the square where the Street of Silk began and followed its winding path up a long hill, past blacksmiths working at open forges, free riders haggling over mail shirts, and grizzled ironmongers selling old blades and razors from their wagons. The farther they climbed, the larger the buildings grew. The man they wanted was all the way at the top of the hill, in a huge house of timber and plaster whose upper stories loomed over the narrow street. The double doors showed a hunting scene carved in ebony and weirwood. A pair of stone knights. You can make a lot of this white and black. The House of Black and White. But it's just nothing. A pair of stone knights stood sentry at the entrance, armored in fanciful suits of polished red steel and transformed into griffin and unicorn. Ned left his horse with Jack's and shouldered his way inside. Now, if I were to really guess that as George was writing, he kind of knew that he needed to introduce Gendry as evidence of the incest. You have to have the book, you have to have the bastard. So he does this. He has a chapter on the book and he has a chapter on the bastard. And so, but that's not enough to fill a chapter by itself. And so we kind of see all of the atmosphere and continuity stuff shoved in here. We get a lot of exposition on Stannis, continuity with regards to like Renly's scheme and Beric Dondarrion and all these sorts of things, and the Hand's Tourney coming. All these things that we've heard before and we'll hear again, but we need to fill a chapter. And so I do think this chapter is mostly filler. I mean, it's nice. It's not, obviously it's beautifully written. It gives you a lot of atmosphere at King's Landing and everything. But we knew it was unnecessary as it's added later. A slim young servant girl took quick note of Ned's badge and sigil on his doublet, and the master came hurrying out, all smiles and bows. "Wine for the king's hand," he told the girl, gesturing Ned to a couch. "I am Tabho Mott, my lord. Please, put yourself at ease." He wore a black velvet coat with hammers embroidered on the sleeves and silver threads. Around his neck was a heavy silver chain and a sapphire that was as large as a pigeon's egg. If you are in need of new arms for the hand's tourney, you have come to the right shop. There's this really stupid fan theory that every time sapphires is around that people are lying, which is just, it's one of the dumbest theories because like people lie constantly, and there's plenty of times where there's sapphires around where people don't lie. So like here, Tabho Mott doesn't say anything. He's not hiding anything. Okay, but people will still take this as like, oh, but the sapphire is like the clue that there's something hidden here. No, like it's just a sapphire. Tabho Mott is completely forthcoming here. If you're in need of new arms for the hand's tourney, you have come to the right shop. Ned did not bother to correct him. "My work is costly, and I make no apologies for that, my lord," he said as he filled 2 matching silver goblets. "You will not find craftsmanship equal to mine anywhere in the 7 kingdoms, I promise you. All of this is true. All honesty. No sapphire." "Visit every forge in King's Landing if you like, and compare for yourself. Any village smith can hammer out a shirt of mail. My work is art. All true. All true." Ned sipped his wine and let the man go on. "The Knight of Flowers bought all his armor here," Tabho boasted, "and many high lords, the ones who knew fine steel, and even Lord Renly, the king's own brother. Perhaps the hand had seen Lord Renly's new armor, the green plate with the golden antlers. No other armor in the city could get that deep a green. He knew the secret of putting color in steel itself. Paint and enamel were the crutches of the journeyman, and mayhaps the hand wanted a blade. Tabho had learned to work Valyrian steel at the forges of Qohor as a boy. Only a man who knew the spells could take old weapons and forge them anew." And here is the very interesting bit of foreshadowing here on reworking ice into new blades. So that's a nice little inclusion here. "The direwolf is the sigil of House Stark, is it not? I could fashion a direwolf helm so real that children would run from you in the street," he vowed. Ned smiled. And in fact, not the direwolf helm, but Sandor Clegane's helm, of course, people take for being a real wolf head during the Red Wedding. Ned smiled. "Did you make a falcon helm for Lord Aaron?" Tabho Mott paused a moment and set aside his wine. "The hand did call upon me, with Lord Stannis, the king's brother. I regret to say they did not honor me with their patronage." Ned looked at the man evenly, saying nothing, waiting. He had found over the years that silence sometimes yielded more questions, and so it was this time. "They asked to see the boy," the armorer said. "So I took them back to the forge." "The boy," Ned echoed. He had no notion who the boy might be. "I should like to see the boy as well." Tabho Mott gave him a cool, careful look. "As you wish, my lord," he said with no trace of his former friendliness. He led Ned out a rear door and across a narrow yard, back to the cavernous stone barn where the work was done. When the armorer opened the door, a blast of hot air that came through made Ned feel as though he were walking into a dragon's mouth. Inside, a forge blazed in each corner, and the air stank of smoke and sulfur. Journeymen armorers glanced up from their hammers and tongs, just long enough to wipe the sweat from their brows, while bare-chested apprentice boys worked the bellows. I think this is very funny because Tabho Mott is dealing with Renly. He is selling to Renly. And maybe he dealt with intermediaries, but you get this idea that like Renly, would want to come and talk to him. And so you'd think that Tabhomat would look at Renly, who apparently looks identical to Gendry, and be like, huh, you look just like my Smith boy. Right? Like when Brienne meets Gendry, she's immediately like, wow, that's Renly. Right? And so Tabhomat works with Gendry, and has met Renly and doesn't make the connection at all. The master called over the tall lad about Rob's age, his arms and chest corded with muscle. This is Lord Stark, the new hand of the king, he told him as the boy looked at Ned through sullen blue eyes and pushed back sweat-soaked hair with his fingers. Thick hair, shaggy, unkempt, black as ink. The shadow of a nude beard darkened his jaw. This is Gendry, strong for his age, and he works hard. Darkened new beard, and yet he flirts with Arya. Show the hand. So I mean, he's got to be. What's Gendry's age? Do they age him down? It's ridiculous, right? Let's figure this out. He's supposed to be. At time of this, he's supposed to be 14 or 15, which, come on, you know. I mean, I think a lot of the characters get kind of, if not aged up, they get aged up in appearance. I think Rob starts growing a beard, you know, and you know, like, come on, like 15-year-old boys, like, can't really grow very good beards. Come on. So here Gendry is like 14, 15 years old here, and he's got a beard on his jaw, and he's got big veiny muscles. A 14, 15-year-old kid, like, come on. So George ages him up physically here in Westeros. Strong for his age, he works hard, steel-shaped like bull's helm with two great curved horns. Ned turned the helm over in his hands. It was raw steel, unpolished but expertly shaped. This is fine work. I'd be pleased if you would let me buy it. The boy snatched it out of his hands. It's not for sale. Tabhomat looked horror-struck. Boy, this is the king's hand. If his lordship wants this helm, make him a gift of it. He honors you by asking. I made it for me, the boy said stubbornly. And this is an important point, you know, because later Dunsen steals the helm and he gets put on Arya's death list. Now Dunsen doesn't know that, like, it's this important to Gendry and probably doesn't care, but you know, it's you know, eventually Arya's probably going to kill Dunsen over this helm. 100 pardons, my lord, his master said hurriedly to Ned. The boy is crude as new steel, and like new steel would profit from some beating. That helm is the journeyman's best at work. Forgive him, and I promise I'll craft you a helm like none you have ever seen. He's done nothing that requires my forgiveness. Gendry, when Lord Aaron came to see you, what did he talk about? He asked me questions. Is all, my lord. What sort of questions? The boy shrugged. How was I? How was I well treated? And if I liked the work and stuff about my mother, who she was and what she looked like and all. What did you tell him? Ned asked. The boy shoved a fresh fall of black hair off his forehead. She died when I was little. She had yellow hair. And sometimes she used to sing to me, I remember. She worked in an alehouse. Did Lord Stannis question you as well? The bald one? No, not him. He never said no word, just glared at me. Like I was some raper who'd done for his daughter. Mind your filthy tongue, the master said. This is the king's own hand. The boy lowered his eyes. A smart boy, but stubborn. That helm. The others call him bullheaded, so he threw it in their teeth. Ned touched the boy's head, fingering the thick black hair. Look at me, Gendry. The apprentice lifted his face. Ned studied the shape of his jaw, the eyes like blue ice. Yes, he thought, I see it. Go back to your work, lad. I'm sorry to have bothered you. He walked back to the house with the master. Who paid the boy's apprentice fee? He asked lightly. Mott looked fretful. He saw the boy, such a strong boy. Those hands of his, those hands were made for hammers. He had such promise. I took him on without a fee. The truth now, Ned urged. The streets are full of strong boys. The day you take on an apprentice without a fee will be the day the wall comes down. Who paid for him? A lord, the master said reluctantly. He gave no name and wore no sigil on his coat. He paid in gold, twice the customary sum, and said he was paying once for the boy and once for my silence. Describe him. He was stout, round of shoulder. Not so tall as you. Brown beard, and there was a bit of red in it, I'll swear. He wore a rich cloak, that I do remember, heavy purple velvet, working with threads, but the hood shadowed his face, and I never did see him. He hesitated a moment. Lord, my lord, I want no trouble. So, we get our Varys inclusion here. None of us wants trouble, but I fear these are troubled times, Master Mott, Ned said. You know who the boy is. I'm only an armorer, my lord. I know what I'm told. You know who the boy is, Ned repeated patiently. That is not a question. Well, I guess he... I guess the thing with Renly coming, I guess he wouldn't be shocked if he knew all along that it was the bastard. But it's funny. It's still funny that if Renly comes, he'd be like, oh, I better not show him. Best not he meet the apprentice. The boy is my apprentice, the master said. He looked Ned in the eye, stubborn as an old iron. Who he was before he came to me, that's none of my concern. Ned nodded. He decided that he liked Tabho Mott, Master Armorer. If the day ever comes when Gendry would rather wield a sword than forge one, send him to me. He has the look of a warrior. Until then, you have my thanks, Master Mott, and my promise. Should I ever want a helm to frighten children, this will be my first place to visit. His guard was waiting outside with the horses. Did you find anything, my lord? Jax asked as Ned mounted up. I did, Ned told him, wondering. What had Jon Arryn wanted with a king's bastard, and why was it worth his life? And so there it is. The chapter gets quite exciting near the end. I think the conversation with Tabho Mott is quite good, and I think and with Gendry is quite good. And that was this necessary plot element. And then you can tell that the rest is George R. Martin killing time with continuity, inserts, and atmosphere. Again, all beautifully written. But now that I know it's a later insert and that George originally had gone right to the tourney, it certainly changes my view on what this is, and how I know when George wants to spin his wheels, he can spin his wheels. Anyway, that's all Eddard VI. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.